Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. This is the Midweek Debate. My name is Steven Railston and I'm joined as usual by Tyrone Marshall. Ty, the sun is out. What a lovely Tuesday afternoon. How is yourself?
I will sing. ChatGPT was hosting the podcast then. How is yourself? Wow, done away with the hosting with ChatGPT. Yeah, I'm very good. Thank you, Stephen. Very good. It says on our fancy new clock here, it says it's 22 degrees. I've got to say, I don't feel like that outside. It's sunny, but
I don't know. It's a nice day.
Chill in the air. I can tell we're on different views here because you've got a polo shirt on and I've got a hoodie on. So
being from the northeast, you see, you used to these conditions. Mate.
At least you've got a shirt on this time. Yeah. Last week's podcast was,
although,
was
to
a
be
bit
fair,
too much, to be honest, when you did it topless.
I was at the under-21 game on Monday afternoon, Bank Holiday Monday. We're recording this on a Tuesday, and I was a bit nippy. I think I've been down here for too long now. Do you know what I mean? I've softened up. Yeah, I used to be harder. Hopefully there's not any more chat GPT glitches throughout this podcast in my voice, because that was a bit of a weird opening intro, wasn't it? But we do like to focus in on a topic on this podcast, as I'm sure you know, and we've decided to get into why United are so much better in Europe than in the Premier League. Obviously an incredibly bad and bleak season in the Premier League this year, but United have one foot in the final of the Europa League after beating Bilbao 3-0 in the semi-finals last week, Ty, which was a fantastic performance, although Bilbao probably did lose their heads, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But in terms of the actual reasons, there's definitely a few reasons, isn't there, why United are performing better in Europe. And should we just start off with the obvious one, that it is weaker opposition? So we'll start off with that, but there is reasons to be positive as well.
Yeah. Certainly some of it has been obviously weaker opposition, FCSB, Victoria Pilsen, but there's been tough games in there as well. I mean, they've been away at Porto, away at Fenerbahce, the knockout games, Real Sociedad, Lyon, Athletic Bilbao, they're all pretty reasonable teams. I mean, Lyon are pushing for a Champions League spot in France and are free scoring, pretty good side. Athletic Bilbao are going to be in the Champions League next year. Real Sociedad, I think, a bit further adrift, but still a pretty reasonable side. I mean, I think you put those three up against some of the teams that have beaten United in the Premier League this season, and I think they would beat them. They played, like I say, Porto and Fenerbahce in the group stages. They played Bodo Glimt at Old Trafford, who they could yet play in the final. So, yeah, there's certainly been some games with weaker opposition, but the knockouts, they've played, I think, 3 pretty reasonable teams, and I say the minimum of fuss. I mean, that would be an exaggeration. Lyon didn't really feel like the minimum of fuss while it was going on. But, they have avoided defeat in every game. They've been away to Lyon, away to Athletic Bilbao, away to Real Sociedad, and not lost. If you ask the teams around United in the league to go and do that, I'm not sure they could. If you said to Brentford and Bournemouth and Brighton and West Ham, go away, play 6 games or 5 games against these teams.
West Ham European Conference winners.
Defeat? Well, yeah, credit to them. I can't remember who they played apart from Fiorentina
in the final, yeah.
But, the competition is a little bit weaker, and obviously these aren't Champions League knockout sides, but Lyon have got a lot of European pedigree. Like I say, could be in the Champions League. Athletic Bilbao, a really good team in their historical terms. Some really good players. They're going to be in the Champions League.
Best defensive record in the league, of course. Yeah.
So there is some weaker teams there, but I don't feel like that is the sole reason, really.
I mean, it definitely helps, doesn't it? You think back to December when they beat Victoria Pilsen 2-1. That late comeback, they were pretty awful for large parts of that game. Yeah. Rescued obviously 3 points, which was quite significant at the time, and that was really important when you think about beat Man City the next week after that in the next game. The actual games themselves have got a lot to do with it as well, don't they? Because different style of play, they're less intense. The physicality isn't as big. You look at the Premier League sides and how they play and how their squads are built. The European sides have different kind of players, and they place an emphasis on different qualities, don't they? You look at Brentford at the weekend. Yes, United named a younger side, but they were very physical, and some of United's younger players struggled with that physicality. In Europe, I feel like their lack of physicality isn't taken advantage of as it usually is in the Premier League. When you see them come against, for example, against Newcastle, or teams who have got really built, strong, athletic midfields, they can really overrun United and control games, and you don't really see that in the Europa League.
No, not as much. And it's funny that the first 20 minutes against Athletic, it felt more like the intensity of a Premier League game. And then obviously the game changed for a couple of reasons, really, but it did feel more like that. But I think what you're saying there, I think there's two players that are a good example to that. Casemiro has been brilliant in Europe, and yes, he's improved in the Premier League, but I think his best performances are in Europe, and the slightly kind of slower pace to the game, the lack of physicality, not the lack of physicality, but the lesser physicality, the lesser intensity, I think allows Casemiro's traits to be seen to a much bigger degree in the Europa League than they are in the Premier League. And you know his performances in the Europa League, you look at him and think he's worth keeping next year.
You also think it's got something to do with going back to Spain, don't you? I mean, it's where he won basically every single trophy there is to win in the game. He was fantastic for so long. And he goes back and he almost grows in stature, doesn't he, when he touches back down in that country. And Athletic Club, Real Sociedad, some brilliant performances against Spanish opposition who seem to suit his kind of style of play, and even at this age, very well.
Yeah, probably playing against those teams, he kind of knows what to expect a little bit more. But I thought he was really good against Lyon as well.
Yeah.
Certainly good against Lyon. So, I think you're right. And the fact that familiarity of playing Real Sociedad or Athletic Bilbao, he's played, I think he played Bilbao 14 times, something like that. So he's got a lot of familiarity with them, knows what to expect, nearly.
Give Ty a wink there.
Knows what to expect. But, I just think his performances, and I think he's been outstanding, really, in the Europa League. His performances have been much better than they are in the Premier League. And the other player that's a good example for this, I think, is Højlund, who gets bullied week after week, really, in the Premier League. I can't think of a centre-half he's got the better of in the Premier League this season. And then suddenly you see him in Europe, and he's a different player. You saw it against Lyon, where he could hold the ball up, he could bring it in, he could bring players into the game. You saw it on, last Thursday. Amorim said it was his best game under him, and you can kind of see where he's coming from. I think there was one moment early on where the ball goes into the channel, and you can see that he's got his elbows out and he's holding off the defender fairly comfortably. And in the Premier League, that just ain't happened. The defender's through the back of him. There's no foul given. Højlund's up, and he's doing that complaining routine.
But it's completely different, isn't it?
He's just a different player in Europe.
Those Premier League teams, now you have to be built on strength and pace and power. Even Arsenal, for example, or Manchester City, Guardiola's kind of changed his teams and he's gone for those kind of players. Abroad, it's still different. That there's more of an emphasis placed on kind of technical, maybe slower build-up, and it really helps United's players. I think that's the key point, isn't it? And you're seeing it with Casemiro and Højlund are probably the best examples of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it does. I think it does suit them, and I think those two are certainly the best players that they are. I think privately, Amorim's been saying for a while now that it's the intensity that he's not seeing in the Premier League, and I think he wants to change that next season. And it's the same thing Ten Hag said when he first came, that he'd analysed the team, and the thing it was lacking was I can't remember what he said. Personality, I think, was the word he used. But that he meant the signings in his first year: Martinez, Casemiro, Antony, all had that kind of edge on the Premier League. And as much as we deride Antony, he did kind of bring that intensity, and that's he's a bit of a snarl. He can have a bit of a snarl, a bit of nastiness in his game. Martinez and Casemiro first season were definitely like that, and it's almost like Amorim's looking at it now and he's seeing exactly the same problems in the Premier League, that they are lacking that physicality and that intensity, and I think it just suits them in Europe. The other thing to mention, I would say, is the system, which I think plays into this theory of kind of you get maybe a bit more time on the ball, the game's a little bit slower. And I think it suits United. And I think this is a view within the club as well, maybe within the dressing room, that they're finding the system, well, I'd say certainly within the dressing room, that they're finding the system is easier for them to play in Europe than they are in the Premier League.
But that's because of the opponents as well, isn't it? It comes into it. No one ever really plays with 5 at the back or 3 at the back in the Premier League these days. To be fair, I mean, Wolves came to Old Trafford the other week and did that quite well. It's probably easier to it's easier to win games when a team's playing that system, because you kind of go man to man and you can kind of pick apart the space. Because I'm trying to think of recent games and kind of what systems, for example, Bilbao have played, or Lyon. Lyon weren't 5 at the back.
No, I don't think they were. Yeah, I don't.
But United have looked better and more comfortable each month having it in the system. And for all we've pored over it and scrutinised it, the players clearly aren't made for it, tailor-made. And there's a few, for example, Dorgu, he clearly is. And although there's been a drop-off recently, he has looked more comfortable in a specialist role. There have been positive signs moving forward with the system. And I suppose in the Premier League as well. Obviously, you're saying it has been better in the Europa League, which I agree with. But there has been positivity in that sense in the Premier League as well, because it is starting slowly to come together and you're starting to see patterns of play, which is important.
I think it's getting a bit better in the Premier League. I think the
results aren't, but that's the thing.
Yeah, I still think the issue, and I've said it a lot on this podcast, is that they don't get enough men forward in the Premier League. And I think the Europa League maybe gives them a bit more time. I mean, I'll admit it, I've done absolutely zero research before this podcast on this, but I'll be interested to see maybe what the possession stats are and the passing stats are, especially. It feels like in the Europa League, they're getting more time to kind of control the game and build into an attack. And I've said it a few times that it feels like this is a slow system. It's a slow build-up. And in the Premier League, they're not getting the ball forward with enough men in support. Attackers are too isolated. Probably doesn't help with the wing-back situation, in that a lot of the time they've essentially been picking defenders there this year. But you look at the goals situation. I mean, they've scored, is it 15 now in the knockout rounds? 5 against Sociedad, 7 against Lyon, 12, 15. Yeah, 15 in 5 games, I think, in the knockouts this season. I can't remember what they've got in the group stage, but they obviously scored in every group stage. Well, they got 3 in Porto. So there's goals in this. There's goals in this system in Europe, and I think it's helping that with the attack. In the Premier League, I still think they look, I know they scored 3 at the weekend, they look toothless in attack in the Premier League.
But again,
still.
I mean, look at those defences that you're facing. I mean, if you look at Lyon's defence on paper, or Sociedad's or Bordeaux Glimps, and they're in the semi-finals, to be fair, or FC 20s, those players would not start in a Premier League back 4. Maybe in the bottom 3, bottom 4.
I don't know. Yeah.
But if you're looking, we talked about there at the start of the podcast, just about the likes of Brentford, for example. These teams, Brighton, who are middle table, pushing towards the European places, they've actually got pretty decent back 4s. I'm thinking of Van Hecker at Brighton, maybe, or these would be the best players for these clubs in Europe.
Yeah, possibly.
I think that's being harsh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm to be honest, I'm struggling to think of a defender from those teams off the top of my head that would necessarily. I mean, I'm sure some of them would get in those bottom half Premier League teams, but I don't necessarily think it's an issue of the defences are. I think it's more of an issue of build-up play than exploiting those defences. I think the build-up play in the Premier League is too slow, and they get impressed too early. They're struggling to play through the press, and I've said it countless times about the lack of service to the attackers in the Premier League. And I mean, I thought it was a great example at the weekend for all the excitement around him. Chidowabi had exactly the same issues as Rasmus Højlund did, in that you're just not in the game. Play centre forward in the Premier League for United, and you're not in the game.
Yeah.
And the classic example was the Bournemouth game, where they have 25 shots and the number 9 has 1 of them. And I think, we've obviously said before, Højlund's movement needs to improve, but it's not like you put Obi in there, and obviously he's really raw, and Amorim said naive to the game, which is, I think that's harsh. I think it sounds harsher than he meant it to sound, but it's true that he hasn't got that experience of playing at that level against those sort of defenders. But also, you just don't get the chances in this team as a number 9 in the Premier League, and I think you get more of that in the Europa League. It seems that feels like the pace of the game and the fact that they get more time to control the ball, to build up play, to get into their system, allows them to eventually get more players forward.
Just looking, it was Maitland-Niles who was starting at right back for Lyon, and
that's
his
a fair
name
one.
evaded
He's
us
had
when I
his
was
chance
thinking
in the
about that
Premier
game.
League,
Yeah,
hasn't he? Yeah.
and he didn't do very well. I think the context of the season is also hugely a big factor, isn't it? I mean, they know how bad they've been, and as the months have developed and they've seen themselves fall down that table and have such a bad season, the importance of the Europa League has increased. And they know that their season has revolved around this competition. So when they're going into that game, of course, they're giving 100% effort in the Premier League.
Yeah.
But there's just that little bit more in Europa League fixtures, isn't it? Because naturally, they are all what matters. And especially in the last few months, because probably around Christmas, you realise that the season was over.
Yeah.
It's still salvageable after Amorim was appointed, but he didn't enjoy a new manager bounce, and the results continued to be poor. And then it was all about the Europa League. And whether the players they'll never come out and say it, but it does come into your mind that, and it will have an effect on performance, even if it is just an extra 1 or 2% in the Europa League. And you've seen that, though, in the performances themselves.
Yeah, I think you probably have. And certainly, I think since that Real Sociedad game and since they got into the quarterfinals, I think there's been a clear shift in focus. And we've probably only really seen it in team selection at Brentford at the weekend. But even, like you say, subconsciously, I think there's that shift towards Europe has to be our focus now, and maybe you are taking it slightly easier in the Premier League. But yeah, I think there's still, I mean, they must be going into those Premier League games and still feeling a real sense of embarrassment. I mean, the 15th in the league now.
Dropped down to 15th after the weekend, yeah.
Minus 10 goal difference.
Minus 9.
Minus 9.
Improvement, single digits.
I know. What Ahmad's goal. Massive for them. But as much as we're saying, like, you know, they've written the season off, they only wrote it off a few weeks ago. And there must still be, when they're going on the pitch, there must still be that real sense of embarrassment at where they are.
Do you think it was a few weeks ago? I mean, no one at the club would ever say this publicly, of course. Amorim wouldn't say this because he's got to toe the right line and speak probably in press conferences. But was it maybe back end of January, start of February that this started? Because it became clear probably February, didn't it, that you're not going to get Europe. And if you're not going to get Europe, then the Europa League is the priority.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I still think around the Real Sociedad game, they were probably too far out from a final to throw all their eggs in one basket. And it's not like, I mean, it's hard to define a cut-off time because I don't think performances and results have got any worse. Because to be honest, performances and results were terrible. Have been terrible all season.
But I mean,
like, I'm struggling to find a line in the sand here where you go, they gave 100% in that game, 90% in that game, and you can see there they were losing 1-0 here and 3-0. Like, I don't think there's a clear line in the sand.
Well, there was some momentum building in January, wasn't it? I feel like they beat Fulham, bit of a scrappy performance.
Terrible game.
But that FCSB game away from home, Manu in the number 10 position.
Yeah,
you famously watched it from
from
the room after going across the
press room in Bucharest.
And then lost against Palace, lost against Tottenham, and then should have got hammered by Everton. Obviously, they salvaged the point, but I mean, it wasn't a good February at all. And February's a really crucial part of the season, I think, because it either sets you up for a decent end, or it does what it did and kind of sets them up to think, you know what, the Europa League's the priority now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Europa League has been the priority for a long time, but I don't think, like I say, I can't see a point in the team selections didn't change much, and I can't see.
I mean, this is a different debate, isn't it?
Change. There is, yeah. But I think that FCSB game you mentioned is probably, in a way, sums it up, as does the Lyon game, and maybe that's slightly different in that they've been through 120 minutes. But FCSB, they win 2-0, and it looked a really competent performance. They were really good. They were good going forward. I think they were. It was very poor first half. Second half was.
I thought they were all right first half.
I thought they were all right. Amorim was fairly critical. I thought Amorim was quite critical of the first half performance, but I thought they were okay.
They were fine. Yeah.
And you watched that game. They played with a lot of control, a lot of patience, and then when the chance came in the second half, Garnacho came on. They injected more pace, created a lot of chances.
So I saw.
And you look at that and think, yeah, there's something to work with here. Then they play Palace a few days later and just get beaten so easily at Old Trafford. The Lyon game, they win 5-4. You're like, what, on an incredible high. What a moment. So much momentum. And then they lose to Wolves at Old Trafford. And, it'd be an interesting comparison, to be honest, to see how they get on a Thursday, and then what the result was on a Sunday. Because just on the top of my head, it feels like those two were a good example, and that you have good European results. It feels like there's momentum there or something to build on. Then they lose at home to average teams, really.
The Wolves game in particular, I mean, some of them have felt really strange, but no one really cared. And I know it's such a weird thing to say about a game of football, especially when you're a club of United stature, but a weird atmosphere that day. Fredrickson obviously starting. It just kind of had the feel as, look, we've just secured a fantastic result in the Europa League. Season's all about that, and this doesn't really matter.
No, I think maybe that's the moment. If I was picking a moment where they basically said, we're coasting through the league.
You think it was then?
Probably it.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit sooner than that, but I can definitely see.
Yeah, I think that was maybe the moment. Certainly with supporters as well, where it was like, right, we've got to concentrate on this now. But like I said, there's been other examples where you just look at some of the teams they've lost to at home, and like I say, I feel like that. Now you've mentioned it, that FCSB game is probably a good example because they controlled that game. They were good on the ball. They were creative, and then they played Palace, and there's just nothing there. It's just a dead performance.
Yeah, and Palace were dominant as well.
Yeah, it's a totally dead performance with no future in it. And a lot of, I said before, people know I used to cover Burnley, and Dyche used to have some of these repetitive sayings that get stuck in your head and were terrible to listen to. But he used to always talk, and it was relevant to struggling teams in the Premier League, which is what United are. And he'd say, you don't look at results. I've said before, it's a low-scoring sport, susceptible to a lot of luck. You don't look at results. Is there a future in performances? And 90% of United's Premier League games this season, you would say there are no future in those performances. The Palace one, there is no future in Manchester United playing like that. There's no future for the players.
No.
There's no future for Amorim. You rewind 3 days to the performance in Romania, and you'd say there's a future in that performance if you can repeat it.
But even if they hadn't had this Europa League spell, which has been brilliant, I think everyone would still be advocating for him to be backed in the summer and be given more time. I don't think anyone would be turning around. There would be certainly more calls and there'd be more articles written, of course, because there'd be less reason. But I still think the logical thing would be to say he needs the players for the system. He needs to be backed because he's come in and inherited, as we've talked about, a squad that was built and assembled not for him, for a previous manager. So, I mean, that never happened, so we'll never know. But again, another interesting one. Should we touch on Bilbao then, Ty? That was obviously last week, the 3-0. I was staggered, to be fair, with how Bilbao lost their heads in that game because just as much as United were fantastic, Bilbao were horrendous. And I think their game management and kind of the way they approached it, for a club who's got so much European experience and who are fourth in the league right now, managed by a very good manager, I was surprised. I really was surprised. But I mean, fantastic news for United. And it just feels like the stars are aligning. For Bilbao to throw in a performance like that in the first leg at home. And let's not count the chickens too soon, because even with a 3-0 advantage with the home leg to come, you can't really trust this team, can you? We know that. But they have a very, 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 very strong chance now of reaching and winning the Europa League final.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like even this United can't blow that. I mean, what is it, 133 times? Team has won by a 3-goal margin away from home, and every single time they've gone through.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Surely not even this United can change that. But if they go 1-0 down inside 20 minutes on Thursday, I can guarantee it'll feel edgy. That's the thing.
The crowd would turn, wouldn't it?
I can guarantee it'll feel edgy. But it's hard to see how Athletic score 3 without United scoring. And obviously that changes things. I mean, it does feel like the stars are aligning. I mean, the opposition, Real, Sociedad, Lyon, Athletic have all had a man sent off against United now in the knockout stages. And to be fair, the red card here only really scored 1 goal against 10 men, given the red card came for the penalty. But it was such a strange game in that Athletic were pretty dominant until United scored. Then the penalty happened straight away. The 3rd goal was great, and they have kind of lost their minds.
Well, I'm not sure if my mate had too many beers that night, but I was talking about the game, and I said, yeah, they were dominant until Casemiro scored, and he was like, no, we were on top. And obviously, Garnacho scores within 5 minutes. That's disallowed, but Bilbao really responded well to that, and they were on top. Yeah,
I thought they were the better team for. Certainly, I think maybe it settled down a little bit by the time Casemiro scored, I think. But the first 20 minutes, they were dominant. They could have scored. They had enough pressure and enough chances, and it looked like being a long night for United. I would say before Casemiro scores for maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes, I think it has settled a little bit.
Yeah. I was also surprised at how poor they were in the second half. Obviously, you're down to 10 men, but you still see teams with 10 men kind of biding their time in the game and managing it a bit better and still creating a few chances. They created nothing.
They did,
and to be fair play to United, because they managed the game as well and passed it well and moved it well and took advantage of having the extra man. But I was surprised at how poor they were, really.
It felt like they had accepted that they could not concede again. And if they somehow managed, the only spell of pressure they had, really, they had a little bit towards the end of the game, and that was it. But it felt very much, and I know Fernandez said this after the game, that they had shut up shop and said, we cannot concede again. At 3-0,
damage limitation.
Maybe we've got a bit of a chance. If they somehow get one back at 3-1 from a set piece, they've got a bigger chance. At 4-0, it's game over. So I think they took the pragmatic view that worst case scenario, this is 3-0.
You talk about the stars aligning, and there's been a suggestion that both the Williams brothers are out of training today, or I think maybe Nico Williams is training on his own. James Maddison, if United do make it to the final, let's say it's not guaranteed, could be out with a knee injury. Everything just seems to be falling into place.
Yeah, the one thing that's not falling into place is the Premier League moving that Tottenham game to the Friday. I mean, it would have been nice and incredibly unfair, to be fair, for United to have an extra 48 hours to prepare for that game. As much as Villa are annoyed by it, I don't think the Premier League really had a choice there but to move that game. Like I say, it does feel like things are falling into place. You can't, the way they've played in Europe this season, you can't see them blowing that on Thursday. I guess the interesting thing for the final is that it's not a European game, is it, really? It's a Premier League game. But
it is Tottenham.
But they've lost every game against Tottenham this season.
Yeah.
Played three,
I think it goes back to 2022. I don't think they've beat Tottenham since then.
Possibly not. But I mean, Tottenham were very comfortable winners at Old Trafford.
But I mean, you look at both clubs. I mean, Tottenham are famous for not winning trophies, and United win trophies even when they're crap. So you put those two factors together, and you think it would result as United win, wouldn't you?
I would say it's...
I mean, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, obviously, but...
I'd say it's no more than 55-45 in United's favour, to be honest. Given what... I know what you're saying about United have that trophy winning advantage, but does it really mean anything?
I think it does. I think
players?
It does.
I don't think it does. It's different. It's history, and all right, some of these players won the FA Cup last year. Maybe that counts for something. But I think the fact that Tottenham have played United 3 times and beaten them 3 times counts for a fair bit as well this season.
It's just getting over the line, isn't it? In major games, in finals, it's a skill in itself. And if you've got players who have been there and done it, the FA Cup final last year against all odds, beating Manchester City, who were fantastic in that season, then I think it's definitely a plus. You'd rather have it than not, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But I think it's level, at the very least, leveled out by the fact that Tottenham have won 3 times against United this season. In a way, I think those Tottenham players would probably say we'd rather have that record for this season, because on the pitch, that'll feel far more relevant that they've beaten United 3 times and twice under Amorim. And I know, all right, one of them was the Carabao Cup. One of them was a United side that was decimated by injuries, really, and couldn't make any substitutes particularly. But I still think that'll probably count for a fair bit on the day. I think United would be favourites if it was Tottenham, but I don't think it would be.
It'd be interesting as how it was priced actually by the bookmakers. It'd be pretty tight, wouldn't it?
I think I would say 55-45 to United. Maybe the bookmakers would go more like 60-40.
11-8 maybe then.
But I don't think there'd be a lot in it. But I also don't think Tottenham are guaranteed to get there, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I mean, that goal from Bodo Glimt was very important. And
it could change everything. Yeah.
It makes that second leg quite fascinating, to be fair, especially with Tottenham's record. We were talking about the game on Sky Sports News, and I had it on the background the other day, and someone asked the question, to which club is it most important win the Europa League? And I actually thought it was a bit of a stupid question, because it's equally important for both clubs, isn't it? You can't say one or the other. They actually responded to saying Tottenham, and kind of turned my head and from the United perspective and thought, what a lot of rubbish, because United need this so badly for financial reasons, for attracting players, for getting into Europe, for salvaging the season. And then I guess on the flip side, you obviously say Tottenham haven't won a trophy in absolutely donkey years, and they need to get over the line. So it's relative to the clubs, isn't it? There's no kind of correct answer to that.
Yeah, no, there's not a correct answer. I mean, the one thing I'd say, it kind of touches on the debate we had last week about, how do we even phrase that debate we had last week? But essentially, if United don't win it, I think they could still say we think we've got the right manager in place.
The in or out debate.
The in or out debate. We think we've got the right manager in place. We've not won it. We're not in the Champions League, but we're pretty confident we'll be close next year. I think if Tottenham don't win it, they've not got the right manager in place. They've not got the squad, really, I don't think. And they're kind of starting from scratch. So I guess maybe from that argument, whoever it was is saying it matters more to Tottenham. Like you say, I think it matters equally to both. But I think it would be easier if they don't win it for United to say, it's really disappointing, but we still think we've got the right structure, the right coach, the right everything in place to make a success of this 2 or 3 years down the line.
The comms manual, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
How can we spin this?
Yeah, if they listen to this, I'm sure they'll be maybe making notes of...
It's like the Mourinho gif when he's writing down on this piece of paper, writing notes.
When they're 3-0 down at half-time in Bilbao, positives.
Right. Yes, how do we do this? We'll touch on Brentford as well then, Ty, before ending the podcast, because I thought it was worth talking about Obi in particular. And I know I kind of touched on the young players struggling physically in the match. Amas and Fredriksson have actually done really well. I thought Fredriksson had a good first half, but maybe waned a bit in the second. And Obi's performance, interesting because, as you say, there's always a clamour for these young players to be played. I'm in the position where I can watch a lot of them and go to the games, the academy games, and you always kind of try to preach caution and patience because it's a one thing dominating under 18s like Obi has earlier in the season and looking like a man against boys, and then coming into the Premier League against players who are 6'4", 6'5", his own height, with way more muscle, experience and quality. It's a different kettle of fish, to put it plainly, isn't it? And you could tell that at the G-Tech, and you're right. To hear Amorim use the word naive, I don't think he means it as harshly as it sounds, because he said it about Obi when he came on against Fulham as well in the FA Cup. But he's just very green and raw, isn't he? Very green and raw.
He is, yeah. But like I said, I also think he's suffering from playing in this team. I mean, to be honest, I've not seen much from him at all in his substitute outings. I mean, the one thing you'd say for him is he got that kind of half chance right at the end at Brentford. He obviously had a few chances against Fulham.
He put himself
kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. Like say, Amorim used that naive phrase against Fulham, and he didn't feel like he did a lot against Fulham, but then got chances, and maybe that's a positive for a striker. But I just felt it was exactly the same as Højlund has, that there was a moment where Bayinda sent one ball to him and Obi was fighting against Collins, and I thought that's what Højlund gets all the time. And Obi's not experienced enough, not confident yet in this team to turn around and say to Bayinda, what on earth was that? But you can guarantee if Højlund had got that ball, he'd have complained about it, and rightly so, because he's got no chance of winning it, really. And even if he wins it, there's no one within 20 yards for him to do anything with it. There was a ball when United had a free kick on like the left-hand side channel, and Luke Shaw just kind of played it into the corner for Obi to chase. The defender had a 10-yard head start on him. He never had a chance of winning it. And it was on Amorim's side, and Amorim just sort of put his arms out. Not great audio content, this, so maybe come onto YouTube for this moment. But he just sort of put his arms out as if to say, like, what's that? And you could see even Amorim is saying, like, what? Just keep the ball. What are you doing? Like, just such a pointless, meaningless... It was almost like a rugby union team playing for territory, like a kick into the corner. And Obi's just got no chance of winning that ball.
Kick in, let the young lad chase after it and see if he can do anything.
But you see United play balls like that to Højlund all the time.
Yeah.
Like, right, we're going to stick it in the corner, try and battle for it. And Højlund gives it back all the time. You know, you see, like, we've talked loads of times about how he gets frustrated, how he complains a lot, possibly justifiably so, but maybe you shouldn't show it as much. But I just thought there was similarities with Obi, and that the service he got just didn't get him into the game. And fair play to him for keeping going. He did well to kind of engineer that half chance at the end, which I think got blocked. But I wouldn't be making any judgments on him from that. I didn't watch him and think he looked ready, but I also wouldn't judge him on it because I just think it's a thankless task to play number 9 foot. And to be honest, I did my piece for the morning after the game on Amorim's comments after Wolves when he said he had no choice to play the kids, but he said this is not the right moment and not the right season to play them. And I think at Brentford, you saw exactly why that was, because Obi had the kind of game that could harm his confidence. Hopefully, you're not going to be saying the same things to him as I'm saying now, but that's the type of game that could hurt a 17-year-old's confidence. Fredriksson thought he did pretty well first half. Thought he struggled a fair bit second half. Should have done better for Sharda's second goal. So you can see exactly, I thought, in that performance, why Amorim had said this is not the right moment and not the right season to throw the kids in. Because I think he said you want a stable environment for them and a stable team, and this is not it.
You could also come at it with the angle, well, they've got nothing to lose, and if not now, then when. So you could look at it in that way as well. I completely get what he means, where it could have longer term implications for young players, and damaging them in that sense, especially maybe their reputations and future prospects. I think it may be just a little bit of a reality check, and I will stress we're not being like critical of him here. This is just honestly speaking about a 17-year-old kid. He's still a kid. Yeah. He's not 18. He does put himself about, and he does work hard, as you said. But the talk of being maybe second in line next season in the strike, I mean, that's just a bit ridiculous, isn't it? I think they need another experienced forward in the summer. Højlund to play second fiddle, and then look, maybe I presume Obi will be kept in the building actually, go on pre-season and then pick up a few minutes here and there, and you think that would be pretty good for his development. Was there anything else to talk about? Trying to think.
No.
Should we talk? Do we touch on the post-season friendlies, Ty? Because I don't think we've talked about that yet. They're playing in Hong Kong in Kuala Lumpur at the end of May, 3 days after the end of the Premier League season against Aston Villa, which is a bit absurd in itself. And obviously, I think the first post-season friendly is a week after the Europa League final. So if you take the Europa League out of the equation, it's a revenue-boosting trip, isn't it? It's £10 million they're probably going to bank around for this. But now they've got one foot in the Europa League final. I'm starting to think, are they going to regret it? Because the winners of the Europa League get £10 million. They're not guaranteed to win, of course. And then if they do get in the Europa League, they get that lucrative, gravy Champions League money as well. And you're taking your players halfway around the world after a taxing season, a miserable season, to play these games in Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is more and more teams are going to do it. We've seen Tottenham and Newcastle do it last season in Australia. I think more and more teams are going to do it. I think the bigger issue is the Europa League final is going to entirely condition how that trip goes. If they've won the Europa League, then it's like almost like pressure off, bit of fun. I'm sure there won't be much training going on out there. It'll be relax, have a bit of fun here. If they lose the Europa League final, it is going to be suck it up for a week. You're going to get absolutely hammered.
I mean, the players
over there. The players are going to be annoyed that they've lost. I would imagine a lot of them are annoyed they've got to go on this trip. Players on international duty are being denied the chance of a week off and a week's holiday. Players not on international duty are being denied the chance to get away. It's in half term for those that have got kids. I guarantee you there's not a single player in that squad happy about that trip. And if you've lost the Europa League final, they are going to get hammered. They're going to get panned for that trip. They're going to get panned on that trip. There's going to be inquests about how this team have finished 15th, 16th, 17th, lost Europa League final, and have got no hope, basically. And I think it is going to be one of the most miserable trips in Manchester United's history.
It would be, wouldn't it?
If they lose that final. If they lose that final.
You're right. If they win, it's a bit of a jolly, and you can kind of go away. And maybe, obviously, there'll be young players involved in that squad as well. But it will just be absolutely bleak if they lose that game and go away.
If they've lost, there's going to be a queue of players desperate to pick up a niggle against Aston Villa.
And you will see that
out of it.
You will see that as well.
You can see that being a possibility. Players are not, like I say, if they've won, maybe it'll be a bit more relaxed. I still don't think players will want to go. It'll be more relaxed. If they've lost, I think players will be desperate to get out of it, to be honest.
Yeah. I think you're right, though. I think it will become the norm. It obviously happened last summer, like you said, with Tottenham and Newcastle. That was just a one-off game in Australia, but to play 2 games, I mean, it's literally halfway around the world at the end of a long season. And it's just, it's weird as well this year, isn't it, with the summer transfer window, because it's opening up because of the Club World Cup. And then shutting again. But I mean, the players are being asked to do far too much, and you can see why they're getting annoyed. And it was Varane, wasn't it, who came out a year and a half ago and voiced his concerns over it and said it was just too much, and it needed to change.
Rodri speaks up about it really well at Man City, to be fair, and kind of had his point proven for him by missing the whole season, pretty much the whole season through injury. The Club World Cup's another issue that is a joke, and I can see that having a real impact on how City and Chelsea start next season. I suppose they're going to give players a week off, then they'll play in internationals, then they'll go straight into the tournament. I think City are going maybe 6 days, a week before their first game. Could be there until mid-July. then maybe you come back, maybe you play 1 or 2 friendlies. I think it's impossible for those players to kind of be at the same level of conditioning that their rivals will be at the start of, in mid-August when the season starts. And I'm going to find it really interesting, to be honest, if either Chelsea or City go far in that tournament, how it affects plans. Because the other issue they've got is they can't arrange much for pre-season because they don't know how long they're going to be there.
That almost is their pre-season, isn't it? It's a pre-season before pre-season.
It's too far out for it to be their pre-season.
It's at the end of the season, which is why it's such a mess.
Because players are
logistically.
I think they'll give players maybe 2 weeks off. I think they're entitled to 3, but I would imagine most will accept 2. But say you reach the final, which is mid-July, you're talking about probably the 1st of August, something like that, coming back in, having to kind of rebuild your fitness. Maybe you only play 1 friendly. I mean, City could be in the Community Shield. It's farcical, really, and it's almost going to feel like maybe they won't need a pre-season because it's not going to feel like they've had.
Well, that's what I mean. It's not going to feel like they've actually been away, really, is it?
In which case, I think they'll either start slowly, or they'll probably fall off a cliff towards the end of the season. But I can't see a scenario where it doesn't have an impact, to be honest. And I think the kind of impact it has on City and Chelsea is probably going to condition like how seriously otherwise teams take it going forward.
And from a United perspective, that's actually quite important, isn't it? Or worth talking about briefly, because they are wanting to be in the top 8 next season, and that's 2 of their biggest rivals for those positions, potentially having a bad preparation, as you've just said. So, reasons to be positive. Clutching at straws. I think so. Maybe clutching at straws.
Yeah, like we say, we don't know how it's going to impact things, but it feels like it's inevitable. It's going to have some kind of effect.
Yeah, we'll leave it there then, Ty.
Good stuff.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, listeners, as usual. Leave us a comment on YouTube and subscribe. And check out the podcast on the audio platforms. If you're already listening, leave a comment on there as well and subscribe as well. Take care.